The world remembers World War II as an era of blood, iron and fire. It was the largest and most devastating conflict in human history, stretching across continents and oceans, consuming nations and reshaping civilization itself. But behind the tanks, the planes, and the battles that became legend, there were quieter stories. Stories that never made it into history books. Stories whispered among soldiers in the dead of night, traded like dangerous secrets, and locked away in classified archives. One of those stories begins not in the chaos of Normandy or the ruins of Berlin, but in the cold forests and forgotten valleys of Eastern Europe, where the Nazis built underground fortresses, bunkers carved deep into the earth, hidden from Allied bombers, designed not just as military outposts, but as laboratories, temples, and sometimes prisons. In these bunkers, the Reich experimented with more than weapons. They pursued the occult. They believed in hidden powers, ancient forces that could be harnessed to turn the tide of war. From secret societies to twisted rituals, from ancient relics to experiments that blurred the line between science and madness, these were places where reason and nightmare merged. The myth of the hidden bunkers. Long after the war ended, stories persisted. Shepherds spoke of iron doors buried in the hills, sealed tight with concrete and steel. Hunters told of strange lights flickering in abandoned forests where no electricity flowed. Local children were warned never to play near certain ridges or caves, where the wind carried whispers in languages they did not know. Some dismissed these stories as folklore, peasant tales born from trauma. After all, the war had scarred these lands beyond repair. Entire villages were burned, families vanished, mass graves lay hidden under moss and soil. It was natural, perhaps, that ghosts would be imagined among the ruins, but others believed differently. They claimed that some of those bunkers had never truly been abandoned, that deep beneath the earth something still moved, something older than the Reich, older even than civilization. The return of soldiers. Decades passed. The Cold War reshaped Europe, but the bunkers remained. Many were forgotten, their entrances sealed. Some were mapped and catalogued by Soviet forces, who quickly closed them off. Others were simply left to rot, their existence erased from official records. And yet, in the late 1990s, when NATO troops were deployed to Eastern Europe during the Balkan conflicts, one such bunker was rediscovered. It began with a patrol, an ordinary sweep through the hills, checking for abandoned weapons caches and unexploded ordnance. The men were young, tired, and alert, their boots crunching over the frost-crusted soil. They had no idea that they were walking into a story that had been waiting for more than 50 years to be told. The iron door. The patrol stumbled across something unusual. At first it looked like nothing more than a mound of earth, overgrown with weeds and scattered branches, but one soldier's boot struck something solid, something metallic. Brushing away the dirt, they revealed a rusted steel door, half buried, half forgotten. Bolts lined its frame. A faded swastika, almost erased by time, was still visible under the grime. The men exchanged uneasy glances. They had been briefed about mines, about insurgents, about local hostiles, but no one had warned them about this. The door shouldn't have been there, and yet here it was. The decision. Back at base, officers debated what to do. Officially, the mission was about stabilization and security. Unofficially, the chance to uncover a lost Nazi bunker was too tempting to ignore. Orders were given. A joint task force of NATO and local specialists was assembled. Engineers, translators, and combat troops returned to the site with heavy machinery. They pried open the door, rust flaking into the cold air, the metal groaning like a wounded animal. The stench that followed was unforgettable. It wasn't just rust and mold. It was something else, something sour, heavy, and wrong. What awaits below? The soldiers switched on their flashlights. The beams cut into darkness, revealing stone walls lined with rotting wood and twisted rebar. Steps descended into the earth, vanishing into shadow. Some swore they felt a sudden drop in temperature, even though the air outside was already cold. Others said they heard faint echoes, as if the bunker itself was breathing. But what struck everyone was the silence. Not the silence of an empty ruin, the silence of a place that was listening. History had left its scars across Europe. Burned out tanks, shattered villages, mass graves, but in this forgotten bunker, the scars were not just on the earth. They were alive, waiting, whispering in the dark. The soldiers had opened a door. What they didn't know was that some doors were never meant to be opened again. The iron door had given way with a groan, its hinges screeching like a dying animal. For a moment no one moved. The soldiers stood frozen in the frosty air, their rifles lowered but ready, the pale beams of their flashlights barely piercing the mouth of the passage below. The first thing that struck them was the air. It came rushing out like a breath held too long, cold, stale and foul. A sour stench clung to it, thick and rotten, a smell of mold and something else, something metallic like rust mixed with dried blood. Some of the younger men gagged, pulling scarves tighter around their faces. Others muttered curses under their breath. Still, orders were orders. Captain Rhodes, the leader of the NATO detachment, adjusted his helmet and signaled forward. 2 at a time, slow, watch for traps, and so they descended. The stairs into darkness, the stairs into darkness. The stairs were steep, carved into concrete reinforced with iron. Rusted pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping stagnant water onto their helmets. Every footstep echoed unnaturally loud, as though the sound was swallowed by the earth and spat back distorted. The walls bore faint markings. Swastikas, yes, but also stranger symbols. Triangles intersecting with circles, lines of runes etched into the stone. Some looked freshly scratched, as though no decades had passed at all. One soldier, Private Miller, whispered, "This wasn't just a bunker, this was something else." His words hung in the air like smoke. The first chamber. At the bottom of the stairs, they reached a wide steel door. Its paint had peeled away, exposing corroded metal underneath. It was locked from the outside, as if designed not to keep enemies out, but to keep something in. With a grunt and a crowbar, the engineers forced it open. The sound thundered through the tunnels, followed by a heavy silence. Their lights revealed a chamber lined with rows of rotting wooden bunks. Mattresses lay shredded, as though torn apart by claws. The walls were smeared with dark stains, blackened over time, but the soldiers knew instantly what it was: blood. In the corner stood a table covered with rusted medical tools, scalpels, clamps, syringes. Glass jars sat overturned, their contents long decayed into unrecognizable sludge. Beside them, strange leather-bound books lay in ruin, their pages covered in symbols and diagrams that made no sense, anatomy sketches merged with occult runes. Corporal Hughes muttered, "This isn't medical, this is ritual." The whispers. Then came the sound. At first it was so faint that many thought it was the wind. A low hum, like distant chanting. It vibrated through the concrete walls, too steady to be random. Sergeant Kowalski gripped his rifle tighter. "Do you hear that?" They all nodded. The sound had no clear source. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the pipes, from the walls, from the darkness itself. Private Miller turned pale. "It sounds like it's inside my head." The captain snapped at them to stay focused, but his own voice shook. Signs of occupation. Moving deeper into the bunker, they found more rooms. One was a kitchen, its stoves coated in rust, pots still on the counters as if left in a hurry. Another was a communications room, its radio smashed, but wires still humming faintly with static. And then the strangest discovery. On a desk lay a journal. Its cover was cracked leather, but inside the ink was shockingly fresh. The entries were dated 1945, yet the writing looked as though it had been penned only days ago. Captain Rhodes flipped through it with gloved hands. The German text was translated by their interpreter, and though fragmented, the words chilled them. "The door must remain sealed. The voices grow stronger. We cannot contain them much longer. A presence in the dark." As the squad pressed further, unease grew heavier with every step. Their flashlights flickered. Radios hissed with bursts of static. Some men reported shadows moving at the edge of their vision, figures vanishing when the light touched them. Private Miller froze at one intersection, swearing he saw a tall silhouette standing at the end of the hall. When others shone their lights, the hallway was empty. The deeper they went, the more they felt it, that they were no longer alone. Closing of the chapter. The bunker was not just a relic of war. It was alive. It pulsed with memories, with something that had been awakened the moment the door was opened. And as the soldiers ventured deeper into its labyrinth, one truth became undeniable. Some bunkers were not built to shelter men from war. They were built to shelter the world from what lay inside. The deeper they moved, the more the air pressed down on their lungs. The bunker felt like a living organism, its walls damp, its pipes rattling as though they carried not water but whispers. Every step into the labyrinth seemed to drag the soldiers further from the outside world, until the memory of the forest and fresh air above felt like a dream. At first it was small things, flashlights flickering for no reason, radios sputtering with faint bursts of static that, if one listened closely, resembled words, boots echoing louder than they should, as if the soldiers were not alone on the path. But soon the phenomena grew bolder, the first signs. Private Miller, already jumpy since spotting the silhouette earlier, was the first to crack. As they entered another chamber, a room lined with filing cabinets and overturned desks, he swore he heard breathing in his ear. He spun around, rifle raised, but there was no one there. "I heard it," he insisted, his face pale with sweat. "Someone standing right behind me." His squad mates dismissed it, laughing nervously, but none of them were laughing when Sergeant Kowalski admitted he'd been hearing voices too. "They're speaking German," Kowalski muttered, his jaw tight. "Clear as day, orders, commands, like they're still down here waiting." The blood trail. In one corridor they found a trail. A dark line stained the concrete floor, leading from one chamber to another. The stains were fresh, too fresh. Some of the men bent down and touched it, pulling their fingers back sticky and red. "This isn't possible," Corporal Hughes whispered. "This blood hasn't been here for 50 years. It's warm." The trail led them to a locked cell. Inside, rusted bars framed a tiny room no larger than a closet. Chains hung from the walls, and the floor was covered in scratches, as though someone had tried to claw their way out. But the strangest thing was the mark carved into the wall. It wasn't a swastika, it wasn't German, it was something far older, an ancient sigil, spiraled and jagged, etched deep into the stone. The first loss. It happened suddenly. One moment Private Harris was with the group, the next he was gone. They had entered a long corridor where the ceiling dripped with condensation. Flashlights darted left and right as the soldiers advanced in formation. Harris had been at the rear. When the captain called for a halt, they turned to check on him and found only darkness. "Harris, report." Silence. They doubled back, retracing their steps, but the corridor was empty. No scuff marks, no trail, nothing but dripping water. It was as if he had been swallowed whole by the bunker. The panic spreads. Fear spread like wildfire. Soldiers muttered prayers under their breath. Some cursed the mission, demanding they retreat immediately, but Captain Rhodes barked them back into line, insisting they continue. "Men go missing in war zones all the time," he said firmly, though his voice betrayed unease. "We'll find him," eyes sharp, but none of them believed it. Not really. The shadow in the hall. An hour later, while sweeping a room filled with shattered crates, Private Miller froze again. His light caught something at the far end of the hallway. A figure, tall, impossibly tall, its head nearly brushing the ceiling. "My God," he stammered. The others swung their rifles toward the shadow, but in the blink of an eye it was gone. Yet the echo of its footsteps lingered, thundering through the bunker until it faded into silence. The breaking point, sleep-deprived, terrified, and deep underground, the soldiers began to unravel. Arguments broke out. A few swore they could see faces in the walls. Others claimed the bunker itself shifted, that corridors they had mapped minutes earlier no longer led to the same rooms. Sergeant Kowalski gripped his rifle and muttered to no one in particular, "This place isn't abandoned, it's feeding on us." Closing of Part 3, by the time the squad regrouped, they were no longer just soldiers on a mission. They were prey, hunted by something unseen, something waiting for them to collapse under their own fear. The cursed bunker was not a ruin, it was a trap, and it had just claimed its first victim. The squad was no longer the same after Harris vanished. His name echoed in their heads with every step, but no one dared to say it out loud. To acknowledge his disappearance was to admit the truth, that the bunker was claiming them one by one. Captain Rhodes ordered the men forward, deeper into the maze of tunnels. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. He too knew they were in uncharted territory, a place where war and reason had no power. The laboratory, they found it behind a reinforced steel door, its hinges nearly fused with rust. When the engineers forced it open, the air that poured out was worse than anything before, thick, putrid, heavy with the scent of decay. Their flashlights revealed what the war had left behind: tables with restraints bolted to them, jars of preserved organs floating in yellow fluid, skeletons chained upright against the wall, their skulls cracked open as though someone had tried to reach inside. But worse than the physical remains were the papers. Stacks of documents lay scattered across desks, many burned at the edges, but enough intact to be read. The interpreter flipped through them, his voice trembling as he translated. "These are not medical experiments. They speak of summoning. They mention breaking the veil. And here," he paused, his face pale, "they write about sacrifices." The black diary. In the center of the room sat a single leather-bound book, untouched by time. Its cover was marked with the same spiral sigil carved into the cell wall earlier. When Captain Rhodes opened it, the pages seemed to hum beneath his fingers. The entries described rituals carried out by SS officers. They spoke of capturing prisoners, forcing them into experiments that combined surgery with occult practice. The ultimate goal: to create a vessel, a body strong enough to contain something not of this world. One line made every man in the room fall silent. "The voices in the bunker demand more. They do not belong to us. They were here before." The blood on the floor. Then Private Miller noticed something: the trail of blood they had found earlier. It didn't just stop at the cell, it continued here, across the laboratory floor, through overturned chairs, past shattered glass. And at the far corner they found it: Harris's helmet. The strap was snapped, the inside smeared with blood, but of Harris himself there was nothing. Private Miller whispered, "It used him, like the others before." The shadows stir. As if in response, the bunker seemed to breathe. The lights flickered, shadows bent unnaturally against the walls, stretching and twisting as though alive. The men raised their rifles, but there was nothing to shoot, only the oppressive darkness pressing closer and closer. Then came the voices, clearer now. Not whispers, but chants, German, Latin, and something else that none of them could recognize. The diary slipped from Rhodes's hands, landing on the floor with a thud. The pages flipped on their own, stopping on a passage illustrated with a crude sketch, a towering, faceless figure rising from a circle of fire. The realization: Corporal Hughes turned to the others, his face pale as death. This place wasn't just a lab, it was a temple. The truth weighed heavy on them all. The Nazis had not been experimenting with science alone. They had been digging at the edges of reality itself, and whatever they had touched was still here. Closing of Part 4. The men stood in silence, surrounded by the evidence of horrors both human and inhuman. And though none dared to say it out loud, each of them felt the same thought tightening in their chest. Harris was not missing. He had been taken, and the bunker was far from finished with them. The soldiers had seen enough to know they were no longer dealing with ruins of war. They were intruders in a place that still pulsed with malevolence. Yet Rhodes ordered them deeper, his sense of duty clashing with the gnawing fear inside them all. The air grew colder with every step. Their breath fogged in front of their helmets, though the bunker should have been warm this deep underground. Radios hissed with static, then fell silent. The deeper they went, the more the walls themselves seemed to close in, like a tomb sealing shut. The first manifestation: Private Miller was the first to scream. His flashlight beam caught something crawling across the ceiling. Long arms, pale skin stretched too thin, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The figure scuttled away before anyone else could see it fully, but the damage was done. Miller dropped his rifle, trembling, whispering, "It's watching us." The others tried to calm him, but even as they did, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor, heavy, slow, coming closer, the chamber of chains. They stumbled into another room, larger than the others, its walls lined with rusted chains. Dozens of hooks dangled from the ceiling, some still clutching scraps of rotted fabric. In the center stood a circle scorched into the concrete floor, blackened as though fire had burned endlessly there. The interpreter knelt, studying the faded inscriptions carved into the stone. His voice cracked as he translated: to bind the gatekeeper, to silence the voices, to keep it from crossing. But the circle was broken. Cracks ran through it, splitting the inscriptions. Whatever had once been contained here was free. The disappearance of Rhodes. Then it happened again. One moment Captain Rhodes was barking orders, his flashlight sweeping the chamber. The next he was gone. His radio clattered to the floor, still hissing static. His rifle lay across the broken circle. But of Rhodes himself there was no trace. The men shouted his name, their voices bouncing off the walls in a desperate echo. But deep down they knew the bunker had claimed him too. The voices rise, and then the chanting returned, this time louder, unmistakable. It filled the chamber, a chorus of voices, some German, some unrecognizable, all overlapping in a dreadful harmony. The sound shook the floor, rattled the chains, made the men's helmets vibrate as though their skulls themselves were resonating with the noise. Private Miller collapsed to his knees, clutching his head. "They're inside me," he screamed. His eyes rolled back and he began mumbling in a language none of them recognized. The shape in the dark. The room dimmed as if their flashlights were losing power. Shadows pooled in the corners, growing darker and denser until they began to take form. At first, it was only outlines, too tall, too thin. But then, as the chanting rose, the shadows grew faces, hollow eyes, gaping mouths, dozens of them, watching from the walls. And among them, one figure stepped forward, taller than the rest, its head brushing the ceiling, its limbs impossibly long. It did not walk, it glided. The soldiers opened fire, gunfire deafening in the enclosed space. Bullets tore into concrete, sparks flying, but the figure did not falter. It moved closer, its face never changing, its hollow eyes reflecting their muzzle flashes. The collapse. As the gunfire ceased, the room fell silent again, silent except for the heavy breathing of the soldiers and the faint sobs of Miller, who now rocked back and forth, whispering words in a language not his own. And then, without warning, the ground shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. The scorched circle on the floor glowed faintly, cracks widening, as if something beneath was stirring. Corporal Hughes shouted, "We have to get out now." But deep down they all knew the bunker wasn't going to let them leave so easily. Closing of Part 5. They had come looking for history. Instead, they had awakened it. And now the cursed bunker of World War II was alive with something far older, far darker than any of them could comprehend. The soldiers were no longer a unit. They were survivors stumbling through a nightmare. Their captain was gone. Miller was muttering in tongues, and the chamber they had just left was beginning to crack apart like a broken shell. Corporal Hughes, now the highest-ranking soldier left, seized command. "Move! We're not dying in here," he barked, though his voice shook with barely contained terror. They retraced their steps through the corridors, but something was wrong. The tunnels no longer matched their maps. Doorways that should have led back to the entrance now opened into unfamiliar rooms. Stairwells looped back into the same hallways. The bunker was shifting, twisting, becoming a maze designed to trap them. The sealed passage. They found what looked like the main exit passage, the sloped corridor that had once led to the steel entrance hatch. But when they reached it, they froze. The way was blocked, completely sealed by solid concrete, as though the bunker had repaired itself. Fresh dust clung to the edges of the wall, proof that this was no relic from the war, but something newly created. Private Alvarez pounded his fists against the barrier, screaming curses in frustration. The wall did not budge. "It's closing us in," Hughes whispered. "It doesn't want us to leave." The stalker. That was when they realized they were being hunted. At first it was only distant footsteps, echoing faintly behind them, but soon the sound grew louder, heavy, deliberate, always keeping pace no matter how fast they moved. One soldier glanced back and swore he saw it, the tall, faceless figure from before, gliding silently at the end of the corridor. Every time they turned their weapons on it, it vanished into the shadows, only to reappear further ahead. The bunker was herding them, driving them deeper into its heart, the Chamber of Faces. Eventually, they stumbled into another massive room. The walls were lined not with chains this time, but with carvings. Dozens, hundreds of faces, all screaming in silent agony, etched into the concrete. Their eyes seemed to follow the soldiers. Some swore the mouths moved when the lights flickered. Miller, still half-conscious, raised his trembling hand toward the carvings and whispered, "They're still alive, trapped inside the walls." The others dragged him away, but the damage was done. The bunker had shown them its true nature. Another loss. It happened without warning. As the squad moved down a narrow hallway, Private Alvarez suddenly vanished. One moment he was there, flashlight sweeping the corridor. The next, his beam cut off, and his screams echoed briefly before silence fell. They rushed forward, searching the spot, but the floor and walls were solid. It was as if the bunker itself had swallowed him whole. The growing despair, now reduced to only a handful, the squad huddled in the dark, panic gnawing at their resolve. "We're rats in a maze," one muttered, "and it's playing with us." Corporal Hughes clenched his jaw, but even he was losing hope. Their ammo was running low, their nerves frayed, and every corner brought them closer to madness. Closing of Part 6. As the last of their flashlight batteries began to fade, they understood the truth. The bunker was alive, and it was not going to let them leave. The survivors had stopped counting how long they'd been inside. Minutes, hours, it no longer mattered. The deeper they went, the more the bunker stripped away their sense of time. Their watches ticked irregularly, sometimes backward, sometimes stopping altogether. Corporal Hughes led the remaining men down a descending staircase that seemed to go on forever. Their boots echoed hollowly on the concrete, but beneath that sound they swore they heard something else, a slow, steady heartbeat pulsing through the walls. The pull. It wasn't just fear that drove them downward. It was something stronger, an invisible hand guiding them deeper, pulling them toward the center of the labyrinth. Each man felt it in his chest, an irresistible pressure urging them forward, as if the bunker itself wanted them there. Private O'Donnell muttered through clenched teeth, "It wants us. We're part of the ritual." No one corrected him. They all felt it too. The central chamber. At the bottom of the stairwell, they emerged into a vast underground cavern, unlike anything they had seen before. It was not built, it was carved, as though something massive had hollowed it out long before the war. The Nazis had only claimed it, not created it. The ceiling arched high above, lost in darkness. The floor was etched with a massive circle of runes, glowing faintly with the same sickly light they had seen earlier. Chains ran from the walls toward the center, as if meant to hold something down, but the chains were broken, and in the middle of the circle, the concrete pulsed like flesh, as if something beneath the bunker was alive and breathing. The whispering choir. The men raised their rifles instinctively, though against what, they weren't sure. The chanting began again, this time not distant, but all around them. The walls themselves vibrated with the voices. Some of the soldiers dropped to their knees, clutching their heads. Their mouths moved on their own, repeating the words of the chant as though possessed. Hughes shouted at them to fight it, but his own voice was swallowed by the roar of the unseen choir, the apparition. From the glowing runes rose a figure, not solid, not flesh, but made of shadow and fire. Its form stretched impossibly tall, faceless, yet staring directly into them. Every instinct screamed at them to run, but their legs refused to obey. They were caught between awe and terror, prisoners to the sight before them. The figure raised one long arm, and the bunker itself groaned as if alive. Dust fell from the ceiling. The broken chains rattled, as though longing to bind again. The realization. Private O'Donnell's voice broke through the chaos. "This isn't a bunker," he gasped. "It's a gateway." The words hung heavy in the air. The experiments, the rituals, the sacrifices, they were never about war. The Nazis had been trying to open something far older, far darker, and now that something was awake. Closing of Part 7. The survivors stood in the heart of the bunker, surrounded by shadows, their minds unraveling under the weight of the impossible. They had come seeking history. Instead, they had found the doorway to hell. The chamber shook as though the earth itself wanted to collapse inward. Dust rained down, echoing like distant thunder. The apparition loomed taller with every breath, its faceless void drawing the soldiers into despair. Corporal Hughes grabbed Miller by the collar and shouted, "Move now!" His voice was raw, desperate. They turned back the way they came, sprinting up the endless stairwell, their boots slamming against the cracked concrete. But the stairs seemed longer than before, stretching on like an infinite loop, the shifting maze. When they finally reached the top, the door that had led back into the bunker corridors was gone. In its place was another wall of stone, smooth and seamless. The bunker was no longer just trapping them, it was rearranging itself, cutting off every exit, reshaping its bones to keep them inside. Private O'Donnell slammed his rifle stock against the wall until it snapped in half. He fell to his knees, muttering prayers under his breath. The shadow hunt. Behind them, the sound returned. Heavy footsteps, slow, inevitable. The faceless figure had followed them into the maze. Each time they turned a corner, it was there. Sometimes distant, sometimes only a few feet away, its form gliding closer. Bullets meant nothing. Grenades echoed uselessly through the halls. The figure absorbed it all, feeding on their fear, the collapse of sanity. Private Miller broke first. His voice rose above the chaos, chanting in the same guttural tongue they had heard in the ritual chamber. He tore off his helmet, eyes wild, and began carving symbols into the walls with a knife. When Hughes tried to pull him away, Miller slashed at him, screaming, "It's not trying to kill us, it's trying to keep us." The squad left him behind, his laughter echoing as the shadows swallowed him whole. Only 3 soldiers remained as they stumbled into a corridor, lit by an unnatural glow. At the far end was a steel hatch, old, rusted, but unmistakably an exit. Hope surged through them. They sprinted, but as they reached the hatch, the floor beneath them cracked open. A black void yawned wide, swallowing one of the men into darkness before he could even scream. The hatch slammed shut on its own, sealing itself with a screech of metal. Closing of Part 8. Now only 2 remained, Hughes and O'Donnell, trapped in a bunker that was no longer stone and steel, but a living, breathing labyrinth of terror. The walls groaned, the shadows closed in, and the realization hit them with finality. There was no way out. Only 2 remained. Corporal Hughes and Private O'Donnell pressed their backs against the damp concrete, their rifles trembling in their hands. The bunker was silent now, the kind of silence that pressed against the skull and made every breath feel deafening. They knew the others were gone, not killed, taken, consumed. The final corridor. The walls around them began to breathe, slow expansions and contractions, as though the bunker itself had lungs. Pipes groaned like bones under strain, and water dripped in a rhythm that echoed a heartbeat. Ahead stretched one final corridor, lit faintly by a sickly green glow. Neither wanted to move, but the pressure in their heads, the same force that had driven them deeper, gave them no choice. They walked. The floor beneath their boots felt soft now, like flesh. The further they went, the more the bunker lost all resemblance to architecture. It wasn't a structure anymore. It was a body, the core. At the end of the corridor lay a vast chamber, round and cathedral-like, but alive. The walls rippled as if veins ran through them. The air was thick, metallic, and reeked of rot. In the center of the chamber stood the true heart of the bunker, a massive, pulsating mass, chained long ago but now freed. Its surface shifted constantly, sometimes resembling a face, sometimes a screaming mouth, sometimes nothing at all. The Nazi runes they had seen earlier covered the floor, glowing faintly, but they were broken, their power long gone. Whatever the Germans had tried to bind here, they had failed. The choice. Hughes raised his rifle, but O'Donnell shoved it down. "You can't fight it," he whispered. His voice was hollow, resigned. "It doesn't want death. It wants witnesses." O'Donnell dropped his weapon and stepped forward, eyes glazed. The chanting began again, echoing through the chamber. Shadows peeled away from the walls and surrounded him. Hughes screamed his name, but O'Donnell didn't turn back. He walked willingly into the mass, his body vanishing into the darkness without a sound. The last man. Now Hughes was alone. His flashlight flickered, then died, leaving him in the faint glow of the ruins. The shadows closed in, circling him like wolves. He fired blindly, the muzzle flashes lighting the chamber in violent bursts. Each shot only revealed more faces in the walls, faces of his squad, their mouths open in silent screams. The ground shook, the chanting grew unbearable. Hughes dropped his rifle, fell to his knees, and screamed into the darkness, and then silence. The secret buried. Weeks later, when another unit stumbled across the bunker, they found nothing. No bodies, no weapons, no sign of the missing men, only sealed walls, as though the corridors had never existed. The official report listed them as missing in action. No one ever mentioned the bunker again, but deep beneath the earth, the chanting continued, waiting for the next intruders. The official story was neat, simple, and easy to digest. The squad sent to investigate the abandoned Nazi bunker was listed as missing in action. Their names were engraved on memorials, their families given folded flags and empty coffins. But the truth was buried, literally. The cover-up. When reinforcements finally reached the coordinates Hughes's squad had been sent to, they found only a collapsed hillside. The entrance to the bunker was gone, buried under tons of rock and earth as if the ground itself had swallowed it. No amount of excavation revealed anything. Engineers claimed the structure must have caved in decades earlier, making the soldiers' disappearance a tragic accident. Yet the men on the ground, those who saw the unnatural smoothness of the stone, the strange carvings half buried in the dirt, knew it wasn't an accident. But orders were orders, reports were rewritten, evidence was classified, and the bunker was erased from maps. The Whisper Network. Among veterans, whispers of the cursed bunker survived. Around campfires, in dimly lit bars, or in hushed late-night conversations, soldiers spoke of the unit that vanished in Germany's Black Forests. Some claimed they'd heard fragments of radio transmissions, garbled screams, static broken by guttural chanting. Others swore they'd seen shadows move unnaturally in the ruins during later patrols, long after the bunker had supposedly been sealed forever. The story became legend, a tale no one dared speak too loudly, because legends often hide truths too dangerous for daylight. The last echo. Decades passed. The war ended, enemies became allies, and the world moved on. But the forest where the bunker had been never grew back properly. Animals avoided it. Locals whispered that the ground there was cursed, that sometimes on quiet nights you could still hear faint chanting rising from beneath the soil. And though governments denied everything, one thing remained chillingly clear. The bunker had not been destroyed. It had merely been covered, waiting, closing reflection. The soldiers who entered seeking relics of the past instead found the remnants of something far older, far darker. Their story was buried along with their bodies. But history has a way of surfacing secrets, no matter how deep they're hidden. And perhaps one day, someone else will stumble upon that forest, dig too deep, and hear the first whispers of the choir that still sings beneath the earth. Because the cursed bunker of World War II is not gone, it is only sleeping. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more Dark War stories.